Garage door was open when I pulled into the driveway. That was the first thing that hit me wrong. I never leave it open. Not since 1998 when somebody walked off with my chainsaw on a brand new generator I hadn't even unboxed. So when I rolled up that evening after a 12-hour shift at the rail yard and saw the door yawning wide like a mouth, I knew before I even cut the engine that something had happened. My wife's car was in the driveway. Her son's truck was parked crooked across the lawn, one tire pressing down into the mulch I'd laid around the maple last spring. I sat there for a minute with my hands on the wheel, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I walked in through the side door instead of the front. Old habit. The kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and something else, something tense and chemical, like the air right before a thunderstorm. My wife was standing at the counter with her phone pressed against her chest, knuckles white. Her son was leaning against the fridge, arms folded, that smirk of his half-cocked, like he was already winning some argument I hadn't been invited to. She turned the second she heard my boots on the linoleum. "What did you do?" Her voice came out high and cracked, like a wire pulled too tight. The phone in her hand was shaking. The card got declined at the gas pump, in front of 3 people. 3 people. Do you know how that felt? Her son pushed off the fridge. "We checked the account. It's empty. There's nothing in there." "What the hell did you do?" I set my keys down on the counter, slow, deliberate, the same way I'd practiced in my head all the way home from the bank that morning, knowing this was coming. "I opened a new account this morning," I said. "I had my paycheck rerouted. The old account is closed." The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. She didn't move. Her son's smirk fell off his face like it had been peeled. For maybe 4 seconds, neither of them breathed. I watched the color leave her cheeks the way water drains from a tub, slow at first, then all at once. "You can't," she finally said. "You can't just do that." "I did. That's our money." "No," I said. "It wasn't." Her son took a step toward me, and I saw it then, that flicker of something ugly behind his eyes that I'd been pretending not to see for almost 4 years. He's 26 now, 6'1", built like somebody who spends a lot of time at the gym pretending he's working. I'm 63. My back is held together with cortisone shots and stubbornness. But I didn't move. I'd done my moving already. I'd done it at 9:14 that morning, sitting across from a bank manager named Yulia, watching her print out the new debit card with my name and only my name on the front. "You don't get to do this," he said. "You don't get to just blow up our lives because you're in a mood." "I'm not in a mood." "Then what is this?" I looked at him. Really looked. The watch on his wrist that cost more than my last set of tires. The sneakers. The phone, the newest one, the one he'd ordered 3 weeks ago, and that had shown up at my door with my name on the credit card receipt. "This is me being done," I said. "Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how a man like me, 63 years old, 2 grown kids from a first marriage, a pension I'd been protecting since I was 24, ends up standing in his own kitchen explaining to 2 grown adults why their gravy train just derailed. I met her 4 years ago at a memorial service. Of all places, a man I'd worked with for 31 years had finally lost his fight with pancreatic cancer, and the church basement afterward was the kind of quiet, sad gathering where people you don't know come up and tell you stories about the dead. She was one of them. She'd been a neighbor of his, she said, brought him casseroles when his wife passed. She had this way of holding eye contact a beat longer than felt comfortable, and a laugh that sounded surprised at itself, like she'd forgotten she was allowed to laugh. I was a widower by then, 3 years out from losing my first wife to a stroke that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday afternoon while she was unloading groceries, the kind of grief that doesn't go away, just changes shape. By the time I met this new woman, the shape it had taken was a vast and silent house. I'd come home from work and the silence was the first thing to greet me. I'd stand at the kitchen sink and eat sandwiches over the counter because sitting at the table alone felt like a kind of admission I wasn't ready to make. So when she started calling, and then started coming over, and then started staying, I didn't push back the way I should have. I told myself I was being given a second chance. I told myself my kids were happy I wasn't alone, even though my daughter said exactly one thing when I introduced them, which was, "Dad, I just want you to be careful." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. My daughter has her mother's instincts. We got married 8 months after we met. I know how that sounds now. 8 months. I was lonely and she was warm, and I confused the two. The boy came with the deal. He was 22 then, supposedly between jobs, supposedly studying for some certification I never quite pinned down, supposedly going to be out on his own within 6 months. I have a son of my own. I know what 22 looks like when a kid is trying to launch. This wasn't that. This was something else. This was a kid who'd never had to fail at anything because his mother had always caught him before he hit the floor. The first ask came 2 months after the wedding. $300 for a transmission repair. I gave it to him. Family. Then it was $400 for a phone he'd dropped. Then $600 for tuition at a community college I later figured out he'd never actually enrolled in. Each time, my wife would touch my arm at dinner and say something about him finding his footing, about how hard it was for kids these days, about how her first husband had never been a father to him, and so this was our chance to be the family he never had. I bought it. For a while, around the 1-year mark, she suggested we combine our checking accounts. Easier to pay bills, she said. More like a real marriage, she said. I had hesitated. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed that night with my hands on my knees, feeling my stomach do something I should have listened to. But I'd just turned 61. My back hurt. I was tired of being lonely. I told myself trust was a muscle and you had to use it. I signed the papers. For 3 more years, my paycheck went into that account, and I stopped looking at the statements. She handled the bills. That's what she said. I'd ask sometimes, casual, how are we doing? How's the savings looking? And she'd wave it off. We're fine, she'd say. Don't worry about it. You worked too hard to worry about it. So I worked. And I didn't worry. The crack started. Like cracks always do. Was something small. In late February, I went to the urgent care clinic for a flu test. $28 for the visit copay. The card got declined. The girl at the front desk gave me that pitying look they give old men whose cards don't work, and I had to dig out my emergency credit card, the one I kept in the back of my wallet for actual emergencies, and pay with that. I came home and asked my wife about it. She laughed. She actually laughed and said the bank must have flagged it as fraud because of some online charge she'd made. She'd call them. Don't worry about it. You work too hard to worry about it. A week later, I was checking my phone after a late shift, and I saw a notification I'd never seen before. It must have come through on some old setting I'd forgotten I'd turned on years ago, back when my first wife was still alive, and we used to get alerts whenever a charge came through. The notification said, ATM withdrawal, $400, 1:47 a.m. I was lying in bed when I saw it. My wife was asleep next to me. I held the phone in the dark and stared at the screen for a long time. The next morning, I drove to the bank instead of going to work. I called in sick for the first time in 9 years. The bank manager I sat down with, Yulia, didn't blink when I asked for 18 months of statements printed out. She just nodded and said it would take a few minutes. I sat in a chair in the lobby and read them. I want to tell you about reading those statements because I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling. It was like reading a list of everything I'd ever worked for, line by line, leaving the building. There was a charge from a sneaker store for $340 in October, a bar tab in a town 2 hours away that I had never been to, a 4-night stay at a beach hotel in Pensacola the same week I'd been working 12-hour overnight shifts to cover for a coworker. There was a charge for a tattoo parlor. There were ATM withdrawals at 2 and 3 in the morning, dozens of them, in clumps, the way you'd withdraw cash if you were funding a habit you didn't want anyone to see. There was a charge for an engagement ring at a jewelry store. An engagement ring. I added it up on the back of a deposit slip with a borrowed pen. $41,260. Over the course of 3 years and change, almost all of it concentrated in the last 18 months. That's the cost of a new truck. That's a year of the nursing home my mother had been in before she passed. That's the down payment on the cabin I'd been telling myself I'd buy when I retired. Yulia came back over and sat down next to me. She had the kind of face that didn't pretend not to know what she was looking at. Sir, she said, would you like to discuss your options? I won't lie and say I went home and made the change that same day. I didn't. I went home and I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, and I tried to talk to my wife. She was making dinner, some pasta thing. I asked her, calm as I could, about the Pensacola charge. She didn't even pause. That was a girls' weekend, remember? I told you about it. You didn't. I did. You weren't listening. There's an engagement ring on here. She turned then. Her face went through about 3 expressions before it settled unoffended. That was a return. The store messed up the refund. I've been chasing it for months. For 8 months? You don't know how those stores are? I asked about the ATM withdrawals. The 2 a.m. ones. The pattern. She put down the wooden spoon. Are you accusing me of something? I'm asking. Because it sounds like you're accusing me. After everything I've done for this family. After taking care of you for years. That was the moment. That word. Taking care of you for years. That was the moment. That word. Taking care. As if I was the one being supported. As if my paycheck wasn't the only paycheck in the house. As if I hadn't been working 12-hour shifts at 63 years old to fund a beach vacation I wasn't invited to, and a pair of sneakers her grown son didn't earn. I didn't fight her that night. I didn't say what I wanted to say. I went out to the garage and sat in my truck for 40 minutes with the radio off, and I made a decision the way I make most of my decisions, which is quietly, by myself, with no announcement. The next morning, I called in sick again and went back to the bank. So that's how I ended up in my own kitchen that evening, watching the color drain out of my wife's face while her son tried to figure out whether to threaten me or beg. He went with both eventually. They always do. You can't just unilaterally, she started. I can. I did. We have bills, you have bills. The mortgage on this house is in my name. The utilities are in my name. I'll pay those. The car payments, the credit cards, whatever else you've been running through that account, those are yours. Her son took another step toward me. This is our home. This is my home. I bought it in 1994. I paid it off in 2019. Your name was never on the deed and never will be. You said. I said you could stay here while you found work. That was 4 years ago. You're 26. You don't need to find work anymore. You need to find an apartment. You can't kick me out. I'm not kicking you out tonight. I'm telling you that starting next month, if you want to live here, you're paying rent, $600 a month, plus a third of utilities. Or you can leave. Your choice. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's insane. That's market rate for a room with a private bath in this town. I checked. I don't have $600. Then you'll need to get a job. He looked at his mother for help. She was still leaning on the counter, her phone forgotten in her hand. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me. How long, she said quietly. How long have you been planning this? Since I went to the bank. You went to the bank. You went to the bank. I went to the bank. She closed her eyes. I watched her face do something I'd never seen it do before, which was calculate. Real, visible calculation. Watching the angles. Looking for the door out. It was the first time I'd seen her without a script, and I realized in that moment that I'd never actually seen her before. Not really. I'd seen what she wanted me to see. 4 years. I want to talk to you alone, she said. I think we're past that. I'm your wife. You are, I said. And we'll talk. But not tonight. Tonight I'm going to bed in the spare room. Tomorrow, I have a 7 a.m. appointment with a lawyer. After that, you and I can talk. Her son made a sound that was half laugh, half snarl. You're going to a lawyer? I turned to him. Son, the next time you speak to me in my own house, I want you to think about whether you'd rather sleep here tomorrow night or on a friend's couch. Because right now, those are your 2 options, and you're picking the second one with every word out of your mouth. He shut up. I picked my keys back up off the counter. I walked past both of them, down the hall into the spare bedroom. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and I shook for about 10 minutes, the kind of shaking that comes from holding still too long. And then I lay down and I slept better than I had in 2 years. The next morning, I met with a lawyer named Margaret, and before the week was out, I'd done 4 things. I had the locks on the house changed. A locksmith came out on Wednesday afternoon and rekeyed every door, including the side door I'd come in through that night. New keys for me only. I had a Ring camera installed at the front door and another one at the side, plus a third one on the garage. My lawyer had been very clear about this. If anything happened, she said, you want it on video. You don't want a he said, she said. You want footage. I had my will updated. The old one had been written 2 years before, when I'd been in that fog of trust, and it had named my wife as primary beneficiary on a chunk of things she had no business being named on. My lawyer walked me through changing every line. My pension beneficiary went back to my kids. My life insurance went back to my kids. The deed to the house, which had been mine alone the whole time but which my wife had been hinting about for 2 years, was reaffirmed as separate property under the prenup we'd signed before the wedding. That prenup, which I'd almost not bothered to ask for, which she cried about when I brought it up, which I'd nearly torn up out of guilt. That prenup turned out to be the thing that saved my life. Listen to me. If you're 60 years old and you're getting married again, sign the prenup. Sign it. Tear up no documents out of guilt. The version of you that signs it is doing a favor for the version of you sitting in a lawyer's office 4 years later trying to figure out how much of your life you get to keep. Third, I filed for legal separation. Not divorce. Not yet. My lawyers suggested separation first because of how my state handles asset division, and I trusted her judgment. The papers would be served within 10 days. Fourth, I had a long conversation with my own kids. I'd been protecting them from this. I'd been embarrassed. My son drove 4 hours that weekend to sit at my kitchen table and just be there. My daughter cried on the phone. Not for me. For her younger self, she said, who'd known and hadn't been able to make me listen. I told her she'd done what she could. I told her this one was on me. She moved out 3 weeks later. It happened in stages. First, the son disappeared. He came home one night while I was at work and packed up and left, and I came home to a bedroom that looked like a hotel room someone had checked out of badly. Wire hangers on the floor, a drawer left half open. The TV I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, which had cost me $800, was gone. I'd expected that. The lawyer had told me to expect it. We documented everything. Then my wife stayed for another week, sleeping in our old bedroom while I slept in the spare. We barely spoke. When we did, it was logistics. She wanted half the savings. I told her the prenup said no. She wanted alimony. I told her the prenup said no. She wanted the car, which was in my name and which I'd bought outright. I told her she could buy it from me at fair market value if she wanted it. She didn't. The night before she left, she came and knocked on the door of the spare room. I let her in. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a long time. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said finally. I know. It started small. I know. He's my son. I know. You don't understand what it's like to watch your kid struggle, to know he's never going to be okay unless you help him. I have 2 kids, I said. I understand. But you weren't helping him. You were drowning him in cash because it was easier than telling him no. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but not all the way crying. Did you ever love me? It was a strange question. I thought about it for a second because she deserved a real answer. I loved who I thought you were, I said. I don't know who you are. I'm not sure I ever did. She nodded. She didn't argue. For what it's worth, she said, I did love you. I just loved you. I just loved him more. I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say. She left the next morning. There's a thing nobody tells you about getting your life back. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like silence. The first night I was alone in the house, after the lawyer's papers had been signed and the locks had been changed and the camera at the front door was blinking its little blue light, I sat in the living room with a glass of bourbon and tried to feel triumphant. I couldn't. What I felt was tired in a way that ran all the way down to the bone. I missed my first wife that night more than I'd missed her in years. I cried, sitting on the couch, and then I went to bed and slept 10 hours. But here's the thing. The silence got better. By the second week, the quiet wasn't a hole. By the third week, it was just space. I cleaned out the garage. I cleaned out the basement. I found 6 pairs of expensive sneakers in the back of a closet, still in their boxes, never worn. I dropped them off at a homeless shelter in town. I found credit card statements in the bedside table of the master bedroom in her handwriting that I hadn't known existed. Cards I hadn't co-signed. I sent copies to my lawyer. I started cooking again. Real food. I'd been living on sandwiches and microwave dinners for so long, I'd forgotten that I used to be the one who cooked Sunday dinners for my first wife and the kids. I made a pot roast. I made beef stew. I made my grandmother's beans the way she used to make them, with the smoked ham hock and the brown sugar and the long, slow simmer. I sat at my own kitchen table and ate, alone, and it didn't feel like an admission anymore. It felt like a homecoming. About 4 months after she left, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I was on the riding mower at the time, halfway through the backyard, and I had to cut the engine to hear. It was her son. "Hey," he said. "It's me." I waited. "I was wondering," he said, "if you might be willing to help me out, just temporarily. I'm in kind of a bind." I let the silence sit for a long count. "How'd you get this number?" I said finally. "It's the same number you've always had." "Right, and the answer is no. You don't even know what I'm asking." "I do, actually. I know exactly what you're asking." "The answer is no. I'm trying to do better." "Good. Keep doing it. I hope it works out for you." I hung up. I sat on the mower for another minute looking at the half-cut grass, and then I started the engine back up. He texted twice after that. I didn't read either one. I blocked the number. About 6 months in, my wife called. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. She said she was in a difficult place. She said her son had moved out of her apartment and stopped speaking to her, and she'd realized finally what I'd been trying to tell her. She said she wasn't asking for anything. She said she just wanted me to know. I listened to that voicemail twice. Then I deleted it. I'm not proud of deleting it. There was a part of me, the part that had loved her or loved who I thought she was, that wanted to call her back, to talk, to hear what her life had become, to maybe forgive her in some abstract way for the 4 years. But I'd done the math. The $41,000, the 4 years, my health, my kids' worry, the version of me who'd sat in that bank lobby and read those statements with shaking hands, the version of me who'd slept in a spare bedroom in his own house because he was afraid of his wife and her grown son. You don't owe people forgiveness on their schedule. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them work on themselves without making it your job to applaud the progress. I want to tell you the part that surprised me most. It wasn't the betrayal. I think on some level I'd known for at least a year, maybe longer. The mind has a way of protecting you from what you can't yet handle, and mine had built me a little fortress of denial that took the bank statements to break. What surprised me was how much of my life came back when I cleared the rot out. Friendships I'd let slide. My oldest buddy from the rail yard, retired now, who I'd been turning down dinner invitations from for 2 years because she didn't like him. We started doing Wednesday breakfasts at a diner across town. Sometimes my son drives down on weekends. My daughter brings the grandkids on Sundays now, and they run through the house yelling and breaking things. And I don't even mind, because the noise is a noise I chose. I retired in the spring, 64 years old, with a pension intact, a house paid off, a savings account I'd rebuilt from $41,000 in the hole back into something that might actually carry me through the rest of my life. I bought a small fishing boat, used. I take it out on the lake on Tuesday mornings when nobody else is there. A woman I met at the diner, a widow about my age, asked me out for coffee about a year after my wife left. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. I'm taking it slow. I haven't combined any accounts. I haven't introduced her to my kids. We're just two people having coffee on Saturday mornings and seeing what happens. She has her own house. She has her own pension. She has a son in Colorado who calls her every Sunday and asks how she's doing, not what she can do for him. I'm not saying this is the prize. I'm not saying I went through hell to find a happy ending in a diner across town. I'm saying my life has space in it now, and the space is mine, and I get to decide what comes into it. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere in the middle of what I went through, if you're sitting at your kitchen table tonight wondering whether you really saw what you think you saw, whether the charges on the statement add up the way you think they do, whether you're being paranoid or whether you're finally seeing clearly, let me say one thing. You are not paranoid. You are not being unreasonable. You are not breaking up the family. The family was already broken. You're the only one who hasn't been told. Go to the bank, get the statements, read them line by line, do the math on the back of a deposit slip, and then call a lawyer. Sign the prenup. If you didn't sign one, it's not too late to talk to an attorney about a postnuptial agreement. Change the locks, install the cameras, update your will, tell your kids what's happening because they probably already know, and they're waiting for you to be ready. Saying no to people you love is not a failure of love. Sometimes it's the only love you have left to give them, because every dollar you hand over to a grown child who isn't growing is a dollar that's keeping them small. Every excuse you make for a partner who's hurting you is a brick in the wall they're building between you and the truth. I'm 64 years old. I have a paid-off house, a pension, a fishing boat, and a Saturday morning coffee date who hasn't asked me for a single dollar. I have my kids back. I have my own kitchen back. I have my own quiet back. And I'll tell you this, the quiet I've got now is nothing like the quiet I came home to that night with the garage door hanging open. That quiet was full of waiting. The quiet I've got now is just mine. If this story sounds familiar, if any part of it lined up with your own life, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what you saw and how long it took you to see it. We tell stories like this on this channel because somewhere out there, somebody is sitting in a kitchen tonight holding a bank statement wondering if they're crazy. You're not crazy. You're just finally awake. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. There's always a next one, and we'll keep walking through this together. I've thought a lot about how I ended up sitting in that bank lobby with shaking hands, reading line after line of charges I never made. The truth is, none of it happened overnight. It happened the way a roof leaks. One small drip you ignore because you're tired, then another, until one day the ceiling is gone and you're standing in the rain inside your own house. The cause was never the money. The cause was every time I told myself I was being too suspicious. Every time I let a bad answer slide because pushing back felt like work. Every time I confused keeping the peace with keeping my dignity. Those small surrenders compounded the same way interest does, quietly, until the bill came due all at once. If I learned anything in those 4 years, it's that a man's character is not tested in the big moments. It's tested in the small ones. The night you don't ask the question, the afternoon you don't open the statement, the morning you don't follow up on the answer that didn't quite add up. Those are the moments that decide who you become. By the time the big confrontation arrives, the work has already been done, for better or for worse, by all the little decisions you didn't think mattered. I want to say something about strength, because at 63, I think I finally understand what it actually is. Strength isn't the loud kind. It isn't shouting in your kitchen. It isn't slamming doors. Strength is sitting in your truck for 40 minutes with the radio off, deciding what you're going to do, and then doing it the next morning without telling anyone. Strength is the quiet appointment with the lawyer. Strength is the locksmith on a Wednesday afternoon. Strength is saying the word no to people you love and meaning it and not taking it back when they cry. And about wisdom. Wisdom isn't knowing the answer right away. I didn't. Wisdom is being willing to look at what you've been avoiding. Wisdom is being willing to look at what you've been avoiding. Wisdom is the bank statement you finally read. Wisdom is the daughter you finally listened to 2 years too late and then thank for waiting. Wisdom is understanding that the version of yourself who signed the prenup was protecting the version of yourself who'd one day need it. I don't think I'm a hero in this story. I was slow. I was afraid. I let things go on for years that shouldn't have lasted weeks. But I also believe that the measure of a man is not whether he ever falls into the trap. It's whether he can climb out and rebuild himself when he does. If you're listening tonight and something I said landed somewhere tender, don't waste that feeling. Open the statement. Make the appointment. Change the lock. The quiet you're protecting on the other side of that decision is yours, and it's been waiting for you the whole time.